Our nation is on the path to going broke. We're running up a $3.3 trillion deficit this year. We have more than $26 trillion of national debt, and neither President Trump nor Joe Biden are giving us details in terms of how they would pay it down. But they have offered perspective that shows us how their strategies differ. In our prior segments, we sat down with members of the president's inner circle, including his son Eric Trump and White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany. In this round, it's Team Biden's turn. We'll go one-on-one with Pete Buttigieg. But first, here's a closer look at the competing approaches to bringing in more money to pay down debt, starting with President Trump.
It's nothing compared to what it's going to be when the trade deals kick in.
Trump says revised trade deals will bring in more revenue, and the recovery will heat up the economy and bring in more revenue, and the acceleration of growth will naturally reduce the deficit and deflate the national debt. The president also said if reelected, he would cut spending. In this Fox News town hall in March, when asked about so-called entitlements, that's Social Security and Medicare, Trump said there will be cuts.
If you don't cut something in entitlements, you'll never really deal with the debt.
We'll be cutting, but we're also going to have growth like you've never had before.
The president also said he wants to take advantage of low interest rates by renegotiating our national debt.
In fact, I want to refinance the debt.
Now, he hasn't explained exactly how he would do that, and economists say you can't do that because that's not how Treasury debt works. It's not like a business loan or a mortgage that you can refinance at lower rates. It's traded on secondary markets, so the government would have to buy it back at market value, which would not save taxpayers. Now, as for Biden's thoughts, he also says the key to reducing the national debt lies in growing our economy. Biden says he'd do it by creating jobs and improving the infrastructure. Biden also plans to bring in up to $4 trillion through 10 years by raising income taxes on people making more than $400,000 a year and by raising the top corporate tax rate. But when you combine this with Biden's spending proposals, those tax hikes would do little to reduce the national debt over time by itself. And that now brings us to our first question for tonight's special guest. Well, Pete Buttigieg, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Good to be with you.
How would a Biden administration decrease the deficit and the soaring national debt?
Well, there's no question that we can't get on top of our debt until the wealthy pay their fair share. Now, this president has specialized in cutting taxes for billionaires like him. It's going to be a little different under Joe Biden, who's made it very clear that he's not going to increase the tax burden on us in the middle class, but he is going to make sure that the wealthy and corporations do pay their fair share. You got companies making billions of dollars paying exactly zero in taxes because our tax code has gotten so full of loopholes. That's going to change. But we also need to make the fundamental investments that make America competitive and make it possible for our economy to grow. We're not going to be able to just cut our way out of that problem. The only way to really get it right is, yes, on the revenue side, to make sure that the wealthy are paying their fair share, but also finding those investments that do, in fact, pay for themselves. Investments in education, investments in infrastructure. And right now, with an economy on the brink, recognizing that there are certain investments we can't afford not to make because the price of doing nothing will be far greater than the price of acting today.
Point Republicans are making in asserting that Joe Biden, if elected, would raise taxes on those making less than $400,000 a year is the fact that he wants to raise the top corporate tax rate. And they state, as do some economists, that if you do that, the companies that pay higher corporate taxes will make up for it by not paying their employees as much as they otherwise would. Under the proposal, is the Penn-Wharton model right in projecting that middle income earners would in fact see a reduction in their after-tax income?
Well, it doesn't have to be that way. That depends how corporations behave, and that depends on other policy choices too. Look, we're the party that stands with workers, that supports workers' rights to organize, that stands with unions, that favors a higher minimum wage. Remember, the minimum wage is lower, much lower in real dollars than it used to be. Now, this is not something we have to guess at because we have in America, in other times, had more sensible tax policies, more sensible labor and wage policies. And the consequence at the time was that we had robust economic growth and working families doing better. Right now, working families are falling behind, getting squeezed, and continued tax cuts for corporations and the wealthy, a strategy we've been trying for 40 years in this country, has clearly failed, as evidenced by the fact that our country has now fallen out of the top 20 in the developed world when it comes to most measures of how we're doing, from health to education. This strategy has been failing since it was introduced in the 80s. It's time for something new. It's time for something different.
Pete Buttigieg, thank you for your time.
Same here. Pleasure to be with you.